Hello again, Jared here, and today we're going to be reading another article by Dr. Ray Peat, and this one is called The Great Fish Oil Experiment. And again, I know a lot of his stuff is controversial, but this one is, once again, very controversial. So, I've listened to a lot of people through the years push for fish oil usage and brain health and all this. I know people with kids who have really pushed this on their kids. And anyway, might be a good article to read before you hit the fish oil a whole lot more. Okay, this is how it goes. Hopefully it's not too loud. A little windy today, and the kids are outside playing and quite loud. But anyway, again, hopefully not too loud. Here we go. Reading medical journals and following the mass media, it's easy to get the idea that fish oil is something any sensible person should use. It's rare to see anything suggesting that it could be dangerous. During the recent years in which the U.S. government has gone from warning against the consumption of too much of these omega-3 oils, and here's a quote, to assure that the combined daily intake of two fatty acids that are components, i.e. eicosapentaenoic acid, or EPA, and docosahexaenoic acid, or DHA, would not exceed 3 grams per person per day. End quote. To sponsoring biased industry claims, there has been considerable accumulation of information about the dangers of fish oils and omega-3 fatty acids. But there has been an even greater increase in the industry's promotional activities. Okay, so I didn't even know that apparently the government warned against it at some point. Not that that would be the source I would go to for suggestions or anything. Moving on. The U.S. government and the mass media selectively promote research that is favorable to the fish oil industry. The editorial boards of oil research journals often include industry representatives, and their editorial decisions favor research conclusions that promote the industry, in the way that editorial decisions in previous decades favored articles that denied the dangers of radiation and reported that estrogen cures almost everything. Marcia Angel, former editor of the NEJM, has observed that the quote-unquote significant results reported in published studies can be properly interpreted only by knowing how many studies reporting opposite results were rejected by the editors. That makes sense to me. One way to evaluate published studies is to see whether they tell you everything you would need to know to replicate the experiment, and whether the information they provide is adequate for drawing the conclusions they draw. For example, whether they compare the experimental subjects to proper control subjects. With just a few minimal critical principles of this sort, most quote-unquote scientific publications on nutrition, endocrinology, cancer, and other degenerative diseases are seen to be unscientific. In nutritional experiments with fish oil, controls must receive similar amounts of vitamin A, D, E, and K, and should include fat-free or EFA-deficient diets for comparison. In declaring EPA and DHA to be safe, the FDA neglected to evaluate their antithyroid, immunosuppressive, lipid peroxidative, that's from Song et al. 2000, light sensitizing, and anti-mitochondrial effects. Their depression of glucose oxidation, that's from Delarue et al. 2003, and their contribution to metastatic cancer, that's from Claveri et al. 2000, lipofuscinosis and liver damage, among other problems. Long list of things I do not want to deal with. Okay. So now we have a little excerpt here from the Houston-based Omega Protein Inc.'s bottom line. May it get a little fatter. Okay, this is all a quote, I guess, from, I believe, Jenna Cawley at the Houston Business Journal. So here we go. Quote, Houston-based Omega Protein Inc.'s bottom line may get a little fatter. the publicly traded company, which produces an omega-3 fatty acid product called Omega Pure, has signed an agreement to provide its fish oil in school lunches in 38 school districts in South Texas beginning this month. The 500-person company, which has ties to former President George Bush Zapata Corp., will distribute the product through an agreement with Mercedes-based H&H Foods. Not a sentence you want to read when it comes to who's going to be feeding your kids. George Bush, goodness gracious. Moving on. Although the dollar amount of the contract between Omega Protein and H&H Foods hinges on future sales, the company is poised to cash in as school administrators and parents refocus their attention on the nutritional content of student diets. Omega Protein president and CEO Joseph von Rosenberg says the company's recent investments of $16.5 million for a fish oil refinery in Reedville, Virginia, scheduled for completion in May, and an increased awareness of the benefits of omega-3 in human food positions Omega to capitalize on predicted demand. End quote. And then it has Jenna Cawley, Houston Business Journal at the end there. And I never know how to pronounce this guy's last name, but I believe he's a doctor. But Andrew Whale, maybe he's not a doctor, maybe just an influencer. I'm not sure. I can't remember. I think he is, though. Okay. Andrew Whale was on the radio recently recommending DHA, usually found in fish oil, to treat depression. And I think that means that a lot of people are buying it and eating it. And I believe there's my thoughts here. I know during the whole silly nonsense, we'll call it, this is 2024, over the last several years, it started in 2020. I know that man posted on his social media sites that he received a certain jibby jab. So, I don't know. Maybe an indication of where his head is. Okay. And I think that means a lot of people are buying and eating it, is what Dr. Peat's article says. A few years ago, the government declared that it was, quote-unquote, generally regarded as safe and approved its use in baby formula. And a few months ago, Texas school districts contracted with Omega Protein, which grew out of the Bush family Zapata Corporation, to provide menhaden fish oil for school luncheons. Between the 1950s and the 1970s, people were assured that eating polyunsaturated seed oils would protect them against heart disease. There is no evidence that the bad outcome of that campaign decreased the gullibility of the public. They are happily joining in the latest public health experiment. Speaking of health experiments, from my comments just a second ago. All right, we have an asterisk here. Andrew Whale recommends eating, quote-unquote, oily fish. Wild Alaskan salmon, mackerel, sardines, and herring. And these are quotes, if you do take supplements, fish oil is a better source of DHA than algae, end quote. When a group of people in government and industry decide on a policy, they can use carrots, good jobs, grants, prestige, and sticks, loss of jobs and grants, organized slander, and worse, to make their guidelines clear. And most people will choose to follow those cues, even if they know that the policy is wrong. Historically, policymakers have told the public that, quote-unquote, radiation is good for you, and estrogen will make you fertile or safely infertile, and feminine and strong and intelligent. And here's another one. Starchy foods will prevent diabetes and obesity. Here's another one. Using diuretics and avoiding salt will make pregnancy safer. Whew. That one's rough. And that the polyunsaturated fatty acids are nutritionally essential and will prevent heart disease. The original quote-unquote essential fatty acids were linoleic, linolenic, and arachidonic acids. Now that the toxic effects of those are coming to be recognized, new quote-unquote essential fatty acids, the omega-3 fatty acids, including those with long chains found in fish oils, are said to make babies more intelligent, to be necessary for good vision and to prevent cancer, heart disease, obesity, arthritis, depression, epilepsy, psychosis, dementia, ulcers, eczema, and dry skin. With just a normal amount of vitamin E in the diet, cod liver oil is certain to be highly oxidized in the tissues of a mammal that eats a lot of it, and an experiment with dogs showed that it could increase their cancer mortality from the normal 5% to 100%. Although fish oils rapidly destroy vitamin E in the body, some of them, especially the liver oils, can provide useful vitamins A and D. In studies comparing fish oil diets with standard diets, these nutrients, as well as any toxins besides fatty acids, this is from a couple of studies, in either type of oil should be taken into account, but they seldom are. Despite the nutritional value of those vitamins, fish oils are generally much more immunosuppressive than the seed oils. Wow, I didn't realize that. That's a big claim. Okay, more immunosuppressive than the seed oils. And the early effects of fish oil on the quote-unquote immune system includes the suppression of prostaglandin synthesis because the more highly unsaturated long-chain fats interfere with the conversion of linoleic acid into arachidonic acid and prostaglandins. The prostaglandins are so problematic that their suppression is helpful, whether the inhibition is caused by aspirin or vitamin E, or by fish oil. Interesting. Some of the important anti-inflammatory effects of fish oil result from the oxidized oils, rather than the unchanged oils. That's from a couple of studies. Reference there. These oils are so unstable that they begin to spontaneously oxidize even before they reach the bloodstream. And I think this is important to understand that sometimes people, I hear about people taking things and feeling better for such and such amount of time, and it's, maybe it's because of the immunosuppressive, actions that these things have. Just a question people should be asking themselves. In experiments that last just a few weeks or months, there may not be time for cancers to develop, and on that timescale, the immunosuppressive and anti-inflammatory effects of oxidized fish oil might seem beneficial. For a few decades, X-ray treatments were used to relieve inflammatory conditions, and most of the doctors who promoted the treatment were able to retire before their patients began suffering the fatal effects of atrophy, fibrosis, and cancer. But a few people are still advocating X-ray therapy for inflammatory diseases. That's from Hildenbrand et al. 2003. The fish oil fad is now just as old as the X-ray fad was at its peak of popularity, and if its anti-inflammatory actions involve the same mechanisms as the anti-inflammatory immunosuppressive X-ray treatments, then we can expect to see another epidemic of fibrotic conditions and cancer in about 15 to 20 years. Around 1970, researchers reported that animals given fish oil in their food lived longer than animals on the standard diet. Alex Comfort, who is familiar with the research showing that simple reduction of food intake increased longevity, observed that the animals were very reluctant to eat the food containing smelly fish oil, and were eating so little food that their longevity could be accounted for by their reduced caloric intake. Even when quote-unquote fresh, deodorized fish oil is added to the diet, its spontaneous oxidation, before it reaches the animal's tissues, reduces its caloric value. Without antioxidants, fish oil is massively degraded within 48 hours. And even with a huge amount of antioxidant, there is still considerable degradation. That's from a couple of studies there. Fish oil has been used for hundreds of years as varnish or for fuel in lamps, and the fatty fish have been used as fertilizer in animal feed, and later the hydrogenated solid form of the oil, which is more stable, has been used in Europe as a food substitute for people. When whale hunting was reduced around 1950, fish oil was substituted for whale oil in margarine production. Like the seed oils such as linseed oil, the fish oils were mostly replaced by petroleum derivatives in the paint industry after the 1960s. Although by 1980 many animal diseases were known to be caused by eating oily fish, and the unsaturated oils were known to accelerate the formation of the age pigment, lipofuscin. Many beneficial effects, quote-unquote, of dietary fish oil started appearing in research journals around that time, and the mass media responding to the industry's public relations campaign began ignoring the studies that showed harmful effects from eating fish oil. When reviewers in professional journals began to ignore valid research whose conclusions are harmful to the fish oil industry, we can see that the policy guidelines set by the industry and its agents in government have become clear. Around the end of the century, we begin to see a strange literary device appearing in which research reports on the toxic effects of omega-3 oils are prefaced by remarks to the effect that, and I quote, "We all know how great these oils are for good health," end quote. I think I detect groveling and shuffling of the feet by authors who want to get their work published. If you are willing to say that your work probably... Sorry, let me say that one more time. If you're willing to say that your work probably doesn't mean what it seems to mean, maybe they will publish it. For more than 50 years, the great majority of the medical publications on estrogen were a part of the drug industry's campaign to fraudulently gain billions of dollars, and anyone who cared to analyze them could see that the authors and editors were part of a cult, rather than seekers of useful knowledge. Likewise, the doctrine of the harmlessness of X-rays and radioactive fallout was kept alive for several decades by demonizing all who challenged it. It now looks as though we are in danger of entering another period of medical, industrial, governmental cultism, this time to promote the universal use of polyunsaturated fats as both drugs and foods. In 2004, a study of 29,133 men reported that the use of omega-3 oil or consumption of fish did not decrease depression or suicide. And in 2001, a study of 42,612 men and women reported that after more than 9 years, the use of cod liver oil showed no protective effect against coronary heart disease. And that's from Hakkarainen et al. 2004 and Edgeland et al. 2001. The most popular way of arguing that fish oil will prevent heart disease is to show that it lowers blood lipids, continuing the old approach of the American Heart Association's heart protective diet. Unfortunately for that argument, it's now known that the triglycerides in the blood are decreased because of the fish oil's toxic effects on the liver. And that's from a couple of studies. In experiments with rats, EPA and DHA lower blood lipids only when given to rats that had been fed, in which case the fats were incorporated into tissues and suppressed mitochondrial respiration. That's from Osmundson et al. 1998. The belief that eating cholesterol causes heart disease was based mainly on old experiments with rabbits, and subsequent experiments have made it clear that it is oxidized cholesterol that damages the arteries. That's from Staprin et al. 1997. Since both fish oil and oxidized cholesterol damage rabbits' arteries, and since the lipid peroxides associated with fish oil attack a great variety of biological materials, including the LDL lipoproteins carrying cholesterol, the implications of the rabbit experiments now seem very different. Another way of arguing for the use of fish oil or other omega-3 fats is to show a correlation between disease and decreased amounts of EPA, DHA, or arachidonic acid in the tissues, and to say, these oils are deficient. The disease is caused by a deficiency of essential fatty acids. Those oils are extremely susceptible to oxidation, so they tend to spontaneously disappear in response to tissue injury, cellular excitation, the increased energy demands of stress, exposure to toxins or ionizing radiation, or even exposure to light. That spontaneous oxidation is what made them useful as varnish or paint medium, but it is what makes them sensitize the tissues to injury. Their quote-unquote deficiency in the tissues frequently corresponds to the intensity of oxidative stress and lipid peroxidation. It is usually their presence rather than their deficiency that created the disposition for the disease. One of the earliest harmful effects of polyunsaturated fatty acids, or PUFAs, to be observed was their acceleration of the formation of lipofuscin, or ceroid, the age pigment, during oxidative stress or vitamin E deficiency. Associated with the formation of lipofuscin, the PUFA were discovered to cause degeneration of the gonads and brain. and the fact that vitamin E could prevent some of their toxic effects led to the idea that vitamin E was essentially an antioxidant. Unfortunately, the protective effect of vitamin E against the PUFA is only partial. That's from Allard et al. 1997. The degenerative diseases are all associated with disturbances involving fat metabolism and lipid peroxidation. Alzheimer's disease, alcoholic and non-alcoholic liver disease, retinal degeneration, epilepsy, AIDS, diabetes, and a variety of circulatory problems involve breakdown products of the PUFA. The products of PUFA decomposition include acrolein, malondialdehyde, I'm not going to hit any of these right, hydroxynonenal crotonaldehyde, ethane, pentane, and the neuroprostanes, which are prostaglandin-like molecules formed from DHA by free radical lipid peroxidation products, especially in the brain and at a higher level in Alzheimer's disease. You're going to have to go ahead and go back and read those instead of listen to my jumbled up whatever I just said. But a lot of degenerative diseases. The reactions of these three types of cell, vascular endothelium, nerve cells, and thymus cells, to the PUFA will illustrate some of the important processes involved in their toxicity. When the body doesn't have enough glucose, free fatty acids are released from the tissues, and their oxidation blocks the oxidation of glucose, even when it becomes available from the breakdown of protein caused by cortisol, which is released during glucose deprivation. Cells of the thymus are sensitive to glucose deprivation, and even in the presence of glucose, cortisol prevents them from using glucose, causing them to take up fatty acids. The thymic cells die easily when exposed either to excess cortisol or deficient glucose. The polyunsaturated fatty acids linoleate, arachidonate, and icosapentaenoic are especially toxic to thymic cells by preventing their inactivation of cortisol, increasing its action. That's from Klein et al. 87, 89, and 90. Lymphocytes from people with AIDS and leukemia are less able to metabolize cortisol. An extract of serum from AIDS patients caused lymphocytes exposed to cortisol to die 7 times faster than cells from healthy people. AIDS patients have high levels of both cortisol and free polyunsaturated fatty acids. That's from Christoph et al. 1988. The cytotoxicity caused by EPA and its metabolites, 15 milligrams of EPA per liter killed over 90% of a certain type of macrophage, isn't inhibited by vitamin E. That's from Fife and Abbey 2000. Immunological activation tends to kill T cells that contain PUFA. That's from Switzer et al. 2003. When animals are fed fish oil and then exposed to bacteria, their immunosuppressed thymic cells, or T cells, cause them to succumb to the infection more easily than animals fed coconut oil or a fat-free diet. Natural killer cells, which eliminate cancer cells and virus-infected cells, are decreased after eating fish oil, and T suppressor cells are often increased. More subtle interference with immunity is produced by the actions of PUFA on the quote-unquote immune synapse, a contact between cells that permits the transmission of immunological information. The immunosuppressive effect of fish oil is recognized as a useful aid in preventing the rejection of transplanted organs, but some studies are showing that survival a year after transplantation is not improved. Polyunsaturated fatty acids, especially those that can be turned into prostaglandins, are widely involved in causing inflammation and vascular leakiness. EPA and DHA don't form ordinary prostaglandins, though the isoprostanes and neuroprostanes they produce during lipid peroxidation behave in many ways like the more common prostaglandins, and they're enzymically, oh man, where is the emphasis in that word? I don't know why can I get it? And their enzymically formed eicosanoids have some functions similar to those of the common prostaglandins. The brain contains a very high concentration of these unstable fatty acids, and they are released in synapses by ordinary excitatory process. Chan et al. 1983 found that polyunsaturated fats caused brain swelling and increased blood vessel permeability. In 1988, Chan's group found that DHA and other polyunsaturated fatty acids added to cultured cells from the cerebral cortex produced free radicals and stimulated production of malondialdehyde and lactate, and inhibited the uptake of glutamic acid, which suggests that they would contribute to prolonged excitation of the nerves. That's from Yu et al. 1986. In brain slices, the polyunsaturated fatty acids cause the production of free radicals and swelling of the tissue, and the saturated fatty acids didn't. Chan and Fishman, 1980. The PUFA inhibited the respiration of mitochondria in brain cells. That's from Hillard and Chan, 1988, and at a higher concentration caused them to swell. That's from Hillard and Chan, 1989. But saturated fatty acids didn't produce edema. Free radical activity was shown to cause the liberation of free fatty acids from the cellular structure. Chan et al. 1982 and 84. The activation of lipases from free radicals and lipid peroxides with the loss of potassium from the cells suggests that excitation can become a self-stimulating process, leading to cellular destruction. DHA itself, rather than its decomposition products, facilitates excitatory, glutamate, nerve transmission. That's from Nishikawa et al. 1994. And that excitatory action causes the release of arachidonic acid, from Pellerin and Wolf, 91. Considering just one of the products of fish oil, peroxidation, acrolein, and a few of its effects in cells, we can get an idea of the types of damage that could result from increasing the amount of omega-3 fats in our tissues. The quote-unquote barrier between the brain and bloodstream is one of the most effective vascular barriers in the body, but it is very permeable to oils, and lipid peroxidation disrupts it, damaging the ATPase that regulates sodium and potassium. That's from Stanimirovic et al. 95. Apparently, anything that depletes the cell's energy, lowering ATP, allows an excess of calcium to enter cells, contributing to their death. That's from Ray et al. 1994. Increasing intracellular calcium activates phospholipases, releasing more polyunsaturated fats. Sweetman et al. 95. The acrolein, which is released during lipid peroxidation, inhibits mitochondrial function by poisoning the crucial respiratory enzyme, cytochrome oxidase, resulting in decreased ability to produce energy. That's from Piccolo and Montaigne, 2001. In the retina, the PUFA contribute to light-induced damage of the energy-producing ability of the cells. That's from King, 2004. By damaging the same crucial enzyme, that enzyme being cytochrome oxidase. Besides inhibiting the ability of nerve cells to produce energy from the oxidation of glucose, acrolein inhibits the ability of cells to regulate the excitatory amino acid glutamate. That's from Lovell et al. 2000, contributing to the excitatory process. High levels of acrolein and other products of PUFA degradation are found in the brain in Alzheimer's disease. That's again from Lovell et al. 2001. The quote-unquote prion disease, CJD and TSE/BSE or mad cow disease have many features in common with Alzheimer's disease, and several studies have shown that the prion protein produces its damage by activating the lipases that release polyunsaturated fatty acids and produce lipid peroxides. That's from a couple of studies. Acrolein reacts with DNA, causing quote-unquote genetic damage, and also reacts with the lysine in proteins. For example, contributing to the toxicity of oxidized low-density lipoproteins, or LDL. The proteins that carry cholesterol and that became famous because of their involvement in the development of atherosclerosis that was supposedly caused by eating saturated fats. My newsletter on mad cow disease discussed the evidence incriminating the use of fish meal in animal feed as a cause of the degenerative brain diseases, and earlier newsletters, Glycemia and Glycation, discussed the reasons for thinking that inappropriate glycation of lysine groups in proteins as a result of a lack of protective carbon dioxide/carbamino groups produces the amyloid, or quote-unquote prion, proteins that characterize the dementias. Acrolein, produced from the decomposing quote-unquote fish oils in the brain, is probably the most reactive product of lipid peroxidation in the brain, and so would be likely to cause the glycation of lysine in the plaque-forming proteins. These toxic effects of acrolein in the brain are analogous to the multitude of toxic effects of the omega-3 fatty acids and their breakdown products in all of the other organs and tissues of the body. Cancer cells are unusual in the degree of resistance to the lethal actions of the lipid peroxides, but the inflammatory effects of the highly unsaturated fatty acids are now widely recognized to be essentially involved in the process of cancerization. My newsletters on cancer and leakiness discuss some of the ways the fats are involved in tumor development. The fats we synthesize from sugar or coconut oil or oleic acid, the omega-9 series, are protective against the inflammatory PUFA, in some cases more effective even than vitamin E. In Woody Allen's 1973 movie Sleeper, the protagonist woke up after being frozen for 200 years to find that saturated fats were health foods. At the time that movie was made, that had already been established. And that's from Hartroft and Porta, 1968 edition of Present Knowledge in Nutrition, who showed that adequate saturated fat in the diet helped to protect against the formation of lipofuscin. And here's a postscript. Royal Society for the Protection of Birds says 2004 has been the most catastrophic breeding season on record for seabirds along the UK coasts. It says industrial fishing to supply fish meal and oil is barely sustainable and imperils the whole marine food web. And here's a quote. The UK has suffered serious seabird disasters this year already. In Shetland and Orkney, entire colonies of birds failed to produce any young because of severe food shortages. End quote. Nope. It's starting another quote, I guess. On top of that, hundreds of seabirds have been washing ashore, having perished at sea. Again, lack of food is thought to be one of the reasons. End quote. The report, Assessment of the Sustainability of Industrial Fisheries Producing Fish Meal and Fish Oil, was compiled for the RSPB by Poseidon Aquatic Resource Management, Ltd., and the University of Newcastle upon Tyne. Okay, so not just our own personal health, not that like our health is any disconnected from the health of the earth and the land and the sea, but if your own personal health wasn't the only reason for this, we also have obviously the effects of big ag, big corp industry feeding off the lies, the gullibility of people. So, The Great Fish Oil Experiment, fantastic article by Dr. Peat. If you haven't liked the video yet, please like it. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and subscribe. Again, very appreciative to Dr. Peat for all his free material he's put out here for us to learn from. This is for educational purposes only. I hope this helps. And until next time.